Now, has UKIP come of age as a permanent force in British politics? Judging by the level of interest in its spring conference over the past couple of days, the answer seems to be yes. UKIP's leader, Nigel Farage, describes his party as the biggest threat to the political establishment seen in modern times. But it's still a party without a single MP, and under our first-past-the-post system, it may struggle to win seats at the next general election, despite opinion poll ratings in double figures. Mr Farage joins me now. Welcome. That is, in a sense, the problem, isn't it? That you're likely to do well in the wrong election. You'll do well in the European elections, where you've said yourself you don't really have any influence in the European Parliament. But to pull this country out of the EU, you need to do well in a parliamentary election.
Well, everybody said that in 2009, when we surprised people becoming second in the European elections. They said, all right, that's great, Nigel, but you'll never do it in a domestic election. Well, what happened last May? The English county elections, we got a quarter of the vote, and even under first past the post, managed to get 150 people elected as county councillors. And we've shown in the last half a dozen by-elections in which we've come second, we're making big progress.
But under the Treaty of Lisbon, it needs to be the national government, it needs to be MPs who pull Britain out, if that's going to happen.
Well, absolutely right. It needs to be MPs who pass a resolution in Parliament to give us a referendum. In the end, it's the people that are going to decide this. If we left it to the political class, we'd never even be debating whether we stay part of the European Union or not. And come on, you know, the next election isn't a general election. And I listen to all the commentators, and all they talk about is what will UKIP do, what's the impact of the UKIP vote on the Tories or Labour. We've got, in 82 days, a national election. It's a European election, and that's what I'm campaigning on.
But for a parliament where you say you don't really have any influence
well,
when you get
I don't think the British have any influence in Brussels, full stop. You know, whether it's the MEPs or the parliamentarians, or whether it's Mr Cameron begging for concessions which clearly aren't going to come.
At the time of your party conference, there's a new thing that people have to sign if they want to be a UKIP candidate. And one of the things it asks is, do you have any skeletons in your cabinet, in your closet, rather?
Yes.
What does that mean?
Well,
what skeletons are you talking about?
Well, what we have done with people is we have done police checks, CRB checks. We've put them through some pretty tough interviews. There's no question that over the years, one or two people have let UKIP down pretty badly. We're doing our best to make sure this doesn't ever happen again.
So in specific terms, what are you trying to screen out?
We're trying to screen out people who would be a huge distraction. And that doesn't mean I want to turn it into New Labour and they just all think the same thing. I want it to be a party that has debate, but I don't want it to be full of people who distract us from our main messages. And our main messages are big, important messages about who governs the country and can we control our borders.
Idiosyncratic but not eccentric.
OK, all right, fine, I'll go with that.
What about, now, let's turn back to the general election. You've said that you will resign as party leader if you don't get one seat. Given your public standing in the polls, that's a very, very unambitious promise, isn't it, really?
Well, look, you know, I'm fighting a European election in 82 days' time, and I genuinely think that we have got a chance, a possibility, of topping the polls in those elections. These are the most important European elections that have ever been fought in this country, and actually, the leaderships of the so-called major parties will be seriously affected by that result. So I'm not going to speculate about what happens in 2015. Clearly, if UKIP is to do as well as I hope it can in 2015, what it has first to do is to get momentum through these European elections.
What about immigration? We've had a week in which immigration figures went bouncing back up again. Is that, in a way, an even bigger issue for you than the EU?
Well, I think that the British public now understand that we cannot have our own immigration policy, that it's utterly meaningless to set targets of tens of thousands a year, whatever you choose. We can't have any control over who comes to Britain, all the while we're members of the European Union. And it's as simple as that. And I think the real concern is that if you look at the Mediterranean, you look at the Eurozone, you see how badly they're doing, there's nothing we can do to stop many hundreds of thousands of more people coming to Britain if they need to.
Why is this a problem? In the sense that we're seeing, you know, skilled people coming from Poland and France. All around me I hear French voices, German voices. These are people with huge amounts of skill and energy helping our economy to grow. If they weren't here, we wouldn't be growing so well.
I mean, the truth about open-door immigration is that not only do we not choose the number that come, we also don't choose the quality. And whilst you're quite right, there are many, many people that have come from Eastern Europe who are working damned hard. And if I, you know, was Romanian, I'd be here in Britain. Of course I would, because the minimum wage is 9 times as high. But we also let in people who are not benefiting our economy. And frankly, to have a massive oversupply of people earning minimum wage, qualifying almost immediately for in-work benefits, changing our communities, in many cases where people are saying, goodness me, is this the town that I know? Is this where I grew up? And I think really the question here, it isn't just about money. It isn't about whether the GDP is expanding.
Is it about nostalgia?
No, I think it's about community. I think it's about a sense of who we are as a people, you know, and what we belong to. I toured the whole of England last year in the run-up to the English county elections, and I met people everywhere who said, Nigel, we've never had a problem with immigration. It, you know, jollifies the place and the food's better and that's great. But how many people can we actually take? What chance have our kids got of getting jobs? Why am I, you know, whether I'm driving a lorry, whether I'm working in a factory, why am I finding that my take-home pay is less than it was 5 years ago? And that is because...
Well, that may be because of economic failure, which is being helped by
we have a distorted labour market. We have a mass oversupply of unskilled, semi-skilled, and in some cases skilled labour. It's driven down wages, and it's hurt those at the bottom of society most.
So if, in UKIP's world, would there be a complete ban on people coming in from the rest of the EU?
Not a complete ban on people coming, of course not. We'd operate a work permit system, and a work permit
Because you've talked about Australia, haven't you?
Yes, and I'm not... Let me make this clear.
I say, in net terms, they have got higher immigration than we've got, and proportionally they've got higher immigration than we've got under the Australian system, which you want for us.
But they're quite a big country. There's quite a lot of room. If you travel around London, you travel around this country on the motorways and the underground system.
Without offending Australians watching, most of it is sand.
Well, a lot of it's sand, but you can build things on sand. I mean, that's happened in Dubai and elsewhere.
Right.
What the Australians have is quality control. What I would like to see us get to is a situation where we've sorted out who is here legally, who is here illegally, and that's a big problem that isn't even being discussed at the moment, and on an ongoing basis to have an immigration policy based on quality control. Surely that makes sense.
Your critics say to you that you are in danger of becoming one of those parties which says one thing to one audience and another thing to another audience. You have said you're the only party brave enough to cut NHS spending, and yet in the Wythenshawe by-election you say you're going to protect the NHS. Nationally you say you're going to look hard at the benefits bills. In Wythenshawe you said we're going to kind of protect the benefits bills. You've been saying one thing. And,
I think what we have got to avoid is doing what the Lib Dems did.
I was going to say, you're not wearing sandals, but, you know.
but the Lib Dems tended to do this. The Lib Dems tended to chop and change their messages. And what we were really saying in the Wythenshawe by-election is we don't want to go on giving £55 million a day to the EU. We don't want to go on giving £25 million a day in foreign aid. And yes, we need to be careful about that.
There's been a certain amount of, you'd accept there's been a certain amount of mixed message, to put it politely and gently.
I don't think it's quite as strong as that, but I think what happens is people run election campaigns and they tend in the short term perhaps to change the message slightly, and we have got to make sure we're absolutely consistent.
So just to take one of those issues, would you carry on funding the NHS at the current level?
We would obviously want the NHS to deliver the best possible outcome for patients. I was in the Torbay Hospital.
That's a very politician's
I was in the Torbay Hospital
so.
2 mornings ago, and it was brilliant. So there are some great bits of the NHS. There are some other bits of the NHS that are failing. Labour doubled spending on the National Health Service, but didn't double the return. What we would look for is better value for money.
Would you carry on spending the same amount of money on the NHS?
If we could get the same result, or a better result, by spending less, that's what we should try and do.
Right, so the answer is no, you wouldn't.
Well, the answer is, let's see where we can make savings, given that middle management has grown by over 40% since 1997. It seems to me there are places here where we can make genuine savings.
Are there any circumstances in which you would raise taxes to spend more on either welfare or health or anything else?
I just think the lessons of tax are that when you raise taxes, tax income goes down. And I would like to think of us doing things the other way round. I think the most important tax reform we need is we need to say anybody earning minimum wage is not paying tax to incentivise people to get off benefits.
So you cut taxes. Overall, that's what you'd hope to do.
If you cut taxes, you've also got to cut back government spending substantially. And the big challenge for UKIP after the European elections is to put a manifesto together that doesn't, as the last one did, resemble War and Peace, and has some numbers that add up, and we're working on that.
So we will see a properly costed...
You certainly will. That's coming, but it's not coming until after the European elections, because for the next 82 days, we want to campaign on who governs the country and why can't we get back control of our borders. One
big strategic question, what the Conservatives say again and again, is vote UKIP, get Labour. It now seems as if Ed Miliband is going to change his policy at least a bit on a referendum. Doesn't that scupper your defence against that?
No, Miliband will promise a referendum. Of course he will. It's become a tradition in British politics that at every election, everybody promises a referendum and then never, ever delivers it. What Liam Fox and others are saying today is baloney. Only a third of our vote comes from the Conservatives, and when you poll UKIP voters and say, if there was no UKIP candidate, how would you vote? Less than 1 in 5 of them would even consider voting for the Conservatives. The reason the Tories won't win a majority at the next election is not because of UKIP, it's because their own voters don't see Cameron as a Conservative.
Nigel Farage, for now, thank you very much indeed.